Hello, and welcome for the third and final time today. I am Sarah Korsh, and I am the Director of Training here at LeClaire. And this is our, again, third and final free CE session that we're offering. And I think this one is going to be a really good one. So just a few reminders. I know many of you have joined us for our first two sessions, so I'll go through this really quickly. You would have received a separate login, so if you're hearing this, you are logged in correctly, and all you need to do is just stay here for the next 50 minutes. That is 50, and that started 30 seconds ago, so we're already into that countdown. After the session is complete, all you need to do is just simply log out of your Zoom. Don't need to click on anything, don't need to sign out. Just staying on the session for the full 50 minutes is going to get you that CE credit. Don't need to send us your national producer number or resident state. We captured all of that information at registration to make this as seamless as possible for you. So, big round of applause for the last time that you have to hear me say those instructions. But with that, I am so pleased to present our third session for today. I am here with Dr. Jackie Henry and Dr. Heidi Strohmaier, and they are going to be giving a CE session on navigating uncertainty for insurance professionals. So many of you may be used to hearing CE sessions that are based on products, that are based on insurance themes, topics, etc. And we feel like this is incredibly important. Here at LeClaire, we know that agents aren't machines, they're not robots, at least not yet. And we want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself so that you can take care of your clients to the best of your ability. And I think this session is going to have incredibly valuable information for all of us, and I'm just so excited for them to hear this. So Dr. Jackie and Dr. Heidi are the founders, owners, the do everything for H&S Wellness Consultants, and I'm going to turn this over to you so that you can give this fabulous presentation.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that warm welcome. We are very excited to be here with you for our CE Live debut. So thank you for that warm welcome again. I'm Dr. Jackie Henry. This is Dr. Heidi Strohmaier. We are H&S Wellness Consultants, and we're here today because some people might think that you're just insurance agents, but we know that's not true. We know that you're part therapist, part bad news delivery person, and juggling all of that can take a toll. And so for the next 50 minutes, 48 minutes or so, we're going to talk about how to protect your most valuable asset, which is you. As H&S Wellness Consultants, we're here to support those in high stress, values-driven environments like insurance. And so we want to just give a little pulse check here today to see, after the rush of the AEP season, where are you at? Are you feeling sort of fully fresh and really filled up with your resilience tank? Are you kind of running a little bit low on gas here, or are you feeling somewhat exhausted and depleted? And maybe if we can just have a little show of hands in the chat, that would be great. Okay. Great. So as you're considering this, we really want to make the case that thinking about your well-being is not just a personal responsibility, it's a professional responsibility and an ethical responsibility so that you can show up and do your best for client relationships. We know that this deeply personal work can often tap some of those emotional reserves. You're dealing with people's hopes and dreams and money anxieties. These are things that we know well from our work as consultants and also licensed psychologists. And so really we encourage you to take this time today to think about, how can I fill up my own energy reserves, my own personal resilience, so that I can go out and be the best relationship steward for my clients and for my work. So today, what we hope you take from our time with you is that you could potentially identify some warning signs and key contributors to burnout. This is something that sometimes happens in values-driven work, where we're bringing a lot of ourselves to our workplace. And that's a wonderful thing. It can give you a lot of meaning and purpose. It can also take a toll, as we've said. So hopefully by the end of today, you'll get a lot more comfortable understanding some of those warning signs and maybe thinking a little reflectively in your own life, what might be some key contributors that to me experiencing some symptoms of burnout. We also hope that this can be a deeply practical session too, that after you leave this time together, that there's actually things you can put right into practice, and things that perhaps go beyond your role as an insurance agent, and maybe also apply not just to your work, but to your life as well. We are whole people after all. And so some of those practical strategies might include setting boundaries, managing stress, and maintaining work-life balance so you can be at your best. And then finally, we're going to introduce the idea of self-compassion. And this can be incredibly helpful to those of us who like to perform, like achieving, who really are driven to be productive at work based on those values, right? But using some self-compassion can actually help us have a sustainable way of staying in our values-driven work rather than leaning on self-criticism, which can often contribute to burnout. So we hope to introduce that as well.
All right, so I want to take a moment to define burnout a bit more clearly, since Jackie's mentioned that a couple times now. So first thing I want to acknowledge is that it is not a medical condition, nor is it a mental health diagnosis. Burnout is really an occupational phenomenon. So the World Health Organization describes it as something that can evolve over time under certain workplace conditions, right? Chronic, poorly managed workplace stress. And there are three key facets of burnout. The first is emotional exhaustion. So that's that sense of feeling just fully drained, really depleted from energy. It's a little different than being physically fatigued, like emotional or mental drain. And then the second element is a negative attitude towards work that can develop over time. This might be cynicism. It might look more like detachment. I'm feeling sort of just unmoored, untethered from the mission or purpose that maybe used to drive me. And then third, we have reduced effectiveness or reduced workplace performance. Stands to reason if you're feeling energetically depleted and if you are feeling kind of cynical or negative about your work, that you're gonna have some kind of suffering in your performance. That might be difficulty with focus. It might look like increased errors, procrastinating. It can show up in all sorts of different ways, but your performance tends to suffer under these conditions. And we invite you to think about preventing and managing your professional well-being and burnout in the same way that you might care for or advise a client to care for or prevent a chronic health condition, right? So certainly you could choose to skip your annual physical and not do the recommended screenings to avoid maybe a $50 copay. But what you know is that doesn't get rid of risk, right? In fact, it can increase risk. If you don't catch or treat something early, actually the costs of that compound over time. And so we invite you to really think about managing your professional well-being in the same kind of way. Be, proactive about it, and you can save yourself a lot of headaches down the road. We also recognize that burnout is not a personal failure, right? There are a lot of very real pressures in many industries, including yours, that can contribute to burnout. And so we invite you to take a moment to share in the chat here, and Sarah will maybe report back to us any themes she's noticing. What do you think are the key drivers of burnout in your field?
So if you want to go ahead and put any of those into the chat or the Q&A, we would love to share some of those. Just wanted to share a couple from how everyone is doing from the beginning, some of my favorites. Someone said the battery is low, but it's finally plugged into the charger. Someone else said that they needed Vegas, which I appreciate.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but what is contributing to burnout in your field? Here are some of the ones pouring in. Meeting quotas. You care, so a specific carrier in general. No time off. Fourth quarter craziness. Working 7 days a week, not taking Sabbath. Overworked and underappreciated. Calls, doing too much and not having enough staff who know what they're doing. Again, specific companies and perhaps financial decisions that they made. Too many changes in the marketplace that we find out at the same time as the client, so we don't have time before we are in the middle of it. I've got also 70 new messages in the chat, so
Okay.
I feel like we're getting
Sure.
some themes here.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly seems like long hours, underappreciation.
Yes, quotas, pressures, changing circumstances. And I also, too, saw a lot of comments about difficult clients.
Yeah.
And so that's really spanning quite a wide range. Admittedly, Dr. Jackie and I are not insurance professionals, but we have had a lot of conversations with insurance professionals. And so we came up with sort of 4 buckets or categories where we think most of these burnout drivers that you just shared in the chat and that we've discussed in conversations, that we think they've kind of map onto these categories pretty well. So the first category reflects kind of that constant background pressure, maybe sometimes foreground pressure, of always generating new leads. So that's converting new clients, new business, having to weather rejections, all in the context of a lot of competition and sort of uncertainty in an ever-changing market. Lots of factors that are outside your control here. And especially when your own commission or your own income is very linked to bringing in new business, right? Your ability to maybe pay a mortgage or feed your family is very much tied to this. So that pressure weighs pretty heavy. At the same time, there's a really different pressure that might be weighing on many of you, which we think of as sort of operational friction. All of the regulation, compliance, some various administrative tasks, all of that stuff that just creeps in and takes up a lot of time. I think of that work as pretty tedious, but really important nevertheless. And I think this bucket in particular can really drain sort of the mental battery and focus people have. And yet, even when you feel like you're kind of running on fumes here, you carry the weight of being a trusted advisor to your clients, who you don't want to leave because of that sales pressure, but also maybe you care about, right? You're having to deal with, hear about, maybe respond to their anxiety, maybe their confusion, their anger sometimes, and worry, and maybe really unrealistic expectations from certain clients about what you can do for them or when you're supposed to respond to their outreach. Having to sort of educate them on really complex topics. So there's a really heavy sort of what we think of as emotional labor that goes into this kind of work. And then finally, we wanted to touch on what we're calling talent and systemic issues here. So particularly if you work in an agency or firm that has more of a sort of grind or hustle culture, that can really amplify the impacts of all of these other pressures, right? And you start to see turnover when rates of burnout are high. What happens when people leave? When good people leave, you might have to absorb some of that extra work. You're losing good people, and you're losing institutional knowledge in some cases too. So it's not good for business, and it's not good for you, right? It just amplifies everything else here. Now we want to take a look at what's going on in the mind and the body under these circumstances, especially over time. So you might notice that some of these signs and symptoms here map on pretty well to those 3 facets of burnout I described just a bit ago. Essentially what's happening here when you're facing all that pressure over time is your fight, flight, or freeze response is activated for a really long period of time. And this is that ancient sort of primal survival mechanism, which you really want to be activated if you are physically under threat, right? So if there's a saber-toothed tiger chasing you, or there's a bus coming at you, you want your heart to be racing, right? You want that blood pumping and all of your resources to be sort of pooled towards whatever you need in that moment to survive an imminent physical threat to your life. The problem is this fight, flight, freeze system is being activated even in situations when you don't need it, when you're not under physical threat. So in the workplace context, this might be a lot of those factors that you just described, the chronic increasing expectations from clients or from supervisors, that sort of work until you can't work anymore culture. And so when that cortisol, when that adrenaline is pumping through your veins, not just for 5 minutes when you're under threat, but for maybe weeks or months, it starts to take a toll on your mind and body. And so these are just a few of the signs and symptoms, very far from exhaustive, but we want to sort of isolate some that might map on pretty well to suggest that you might be experiencing burnout if you're noticing these. So that's physical signs like maybe muscle tension, headaches, that fatigue, trouble sleeping. Emotional signs and symptoms, I'm more irritable or cranky, maybe more easily overwhelmed, worrying a lot, maybe feeling detached or unmotivated. And then this can start to shape our behaviors too, how we interact with our work, how we interact with other people in our environment. Might look like kind of isolating or withdrawing. It could look like procrastination, avoiding things, and maybe some of those increased errors I described earlier too. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for a quick poll here.
All right. Well, we are launching our first poll question for this session. What is your favorite sport? We've got baseball, we've got basketball, we've got hockey, and we have couch potato cheering. I noticed football is not on this, so I guess we're anti-football here.
We've given up on the Vikings.
Yeah.
Ooh, those are fighting words. All right, so it looks like I was really expecting in the state of hockey that hockey would be number one, but we know we've got people from all over the Midwest. And I love when people put in their own responses in there. We've got soccer. I'm going to go with that one is a great one. Skiing. We've got some Packers fans. We'll just scroll right past those ones. But overwhelmingly looks like couch potato cheering is taking top prize. These are our people. All right, we'll give about 5 more seconds here. Would also just like to say we had an overwhelming response to the what's causing burnout, et cetera. We really appreciate your participation in it, and there's going to be a few more coming up later on. So please feel free to keep putting those into the chat or the Q&A. But at this point, I will end the poll and turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks. So jumping back into some of those physical, emotional, behavioral signs and symptoms, we want to illustrate what this might look like in your context. So we're going to call this insurance agent Mary. Right, she's a seasoned sort of veteran here. She knows what annual enrollment period entails, and she's ready to sort of like get in that mode. So she is putting in sort of 12-hour work days here, burning the candle at both ends, and experiencing a lot of that sustained cortisol spike. She's kind of subsisting on caffeine and maybe quick trip donuts, granola bars here and there, just trying to get it done. She's skipping her usual routine at the gym. She's no longer doing her weekly trivia nights with friends or the pickleball league. She just knows she's got to set it aside and just get through this season. Emotionally, most of her human interactions are with clients or prospective clients, and she's really seen how much they're struggling right now with worries, with stress around healthcare, around finances, and she's kind of serving as a shock absorber for those folks. Now, she finally gets through the annual enrollment period and thinks, all right, now I can finally sleep, rest, recharge the batteries. But the problem is she notices this year she's not bouncing back like she usually does. Instead, her brain's kind of buffering. You know, that phenomenon where you're reading a paragraph over and over and over and it's just not sinking in. That's not her usual, and yet she notices this sign. She also exhibits this sort of brittle response where really minor inconveniences just set her off. She has this like outsized rage response to a little technical glitch, right? And again, not typical for her. So she notices something feels a little off. She's still socially withdrawn. She hasn't gone back to the trivia night. She hasn't gone back to pickleball. She finds that her empathy tank is sort of empty, and any human interaction, even with her friends and family, just feels exhausting. And finally, she's got some leftover sort of physical symptoms, maybe some tension in her jaw and this headache that really won't fully go away. So I'd ask you to just keep Mary in mind and think too about whether you've noticed any symptoms like this in yourself. And we'll come back to her a bit later.
Great. So now we're going to play a little PG version, insurance version of Never Have I Ever, okay? Anybody ever had trouble falling asleep thinking about AEP? Anybody procrastinated a client phone call just to do some research? I hope you don't feel too seen here, but anybody hidden a document that you needed to review, just some other things, so hoping it would just go away? Or just had coffee for your food pyramid throughout the day. So maybe you resonate with some, hopefully maybe not all of them, but this is just an idea to show you what this can look like in your own life. So now in this part of the presentation, we're going to transfer to what can we do about this. We're sort of set at the stage of maybe how you might see this show up in you and your workplace and your colleagues. But now we want to empower you to think, what are some things that we can do about this? And here are some of the things that we're going to go over. Self-compassion, as I mentioned before, what it is and what it isn't, and some simple ways to bring that into your life. Boundaries and breaks, how to put some containers around our time so that we can recharge and then still show up to do what we need to do. Overcoming any obstacles that present some barriers to putting some of these in place. We'll troubleshoot some of that. And then how to really build that long-term resilience, not just responding to what's happening acutely in this moment, but really set the stage so that you can have a sustainable way of staying resilient at work. So self-compassion. You might have heard this, you might think it's a little therapist-y and fluffy, and we're here to really make this very practical for you. Self-compassion is essentially just treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding and acceptance that you would offer a close friend or family member. I know you all are out there doing this for the people in your life, and it's time that we maybe do this for ourselves as well. So what this is not self-pity or poor me or allowing you to say, you know what, you don't have to go to work for the next couple weeks, you can just sit and watch TV at home. It's not, saying no to your responsibilities either. It's really just an active process of how to acknowledge that things are stressful right now without getting lost in them either. This can be sort of a source of strength and resilience. This is just also not an excuse to not do anything, okay? So there are three components that are pretty important to self-compassion. One is that self-kindness. How can we replace that inner critic with voices of encouragement? Then the second is common humanity. How do we recognize that what we're experiencing, maybe the specifics are unique to us, but the experience of feeling under stress or struggling with something, that is universal and part of being a human. And then third, mindfulness. How do we have a little bit more self-awareness about how stress shows up for us so we can catch it earlier and acknowledge our difficult emotions without it getting to a boiling point where it reaches explode, right? So rather than talk a little bit more, I really want to show you. And in the privacy of your own computer or home office or office place, I hope that you can participate with an open mind here. I invite you to close your eyes and start by just taking a nice deep breath in and a longer breath out. And notice just for a minute where in your body you might be feeling tension. Some common areas might be your jaw, your shoulders, your belly muscles. And just see if you can offer just a 10% softening to those areas. If your mind wanders away, that's all right. That's what minds do. You can just gently bring them back to your breath. I want you to call to mind a particularly stressful situation at work, maybe in the last day or two, or maybe a particularly difficult time during AP. And I want you to just notice what happens to your body as you call that to mind. Where does tension settle? Maybe in one of those places we mentioned. And I want you to notice maybe if there's a voice that shows up, maybe a familiar voice of self-criticism perhaps. Why aren't you doing enough? Why did you put this off? Why can't you handle this better? And I want you to notice how those words feel in your body as that self-critic shows up. And we're going to offer something different. So with your next deep breath, I want you to see if you can just offer yourself the self-compassion. This is stressful. This is hard. Other people would feel this way. And how can I offer myself just a moment of encouragement instead of criticism? And maybe that kindness, maybe that encouragement looks like a nice deep breath that you let sort of wash over that tension. Maybe you imagine what you might say to a friend. Maybe you imagine petting your cute little dog, an act of kindness. If it's hard or it's awkward to do it for yourself in this moment, it's okay to just imagine how you might say something or approach someone else. That counts. So now you can take one final nice deep breath, come back, open your eyes, and we'll go into that a little bit more. So self-compassion in practice, that was just less than a couple minutes, right? This is not a silent retreat for a week. This is not over and over dedicating minutes and hours of your life to this. This is a few brief check-ins through the day, or especially during stressful moments, where you can just take a deep breath can be an act of kindness. Or just imagine yourself this role reversal. What would I tell a friend in my shoes? And so in that moment where you're trying to reframe maybe a tendency to lean on self-criticism, you could just offer a brief reframe, right? Where maybe this deal didn't go my way, but I really did show up, or I learned a new skill, or I met a new relationship, right? And then let's just give ourselves a 24-hour grace. Let's allow those emotions to sort of settle and then revisit when we're thinking a little bit more clearly. These are things that you can do that are very short, but very powerful. And so I encourage you to think about where these might fit into your day. You know, is it a morning intention over your first cup of coffee or your drive in? Is it a little bit of, breathing right before you go to sleep? These are not a big time investment, but do have a big impact. So in order to think about how we might put in self-compassion, we want to ask ourselves, what feels hard about self-compassion? And what might it help you with? And so this is where we can get real specific. And we know that the likelihood of you, putting something into practice, it needs to be super itty-bitty small, right? What is one step that you might take to practice self-compassion? And the first, it could be, I'm going to recognize when I'm really stressed and take a deep breath. And so as you consider that, we can put that in the chat, we can troubleshoot that with you. We're going to also then move on to boundaries and breaks. This is about how to really be mindful about our time, right? And Heidi's going to talk about it.
All right. And before I move into that, did we have any comments from the chat there on what feels hard about self-compassion?
Yes. Sometimes we feel we need to tough it out is a common response that I'm seeing is just, which I think is maybe saying it's hard to be kind to yourself. So it's the expectations on it. Also having time away from my family. There's more than one person who needs our help. Other people are saying they absolutely love this presentation.
Great.
Reflect on emotions and relax. So lots of different responses coming through here.
Yeah, actually, we're going to get to a couple of those in a few slides, so that's really helpful. In particular, some of the internal feelings like that guilt, that pull on our time, so the time pressure, and how that makes us feel. And inside, we have identified as kind of the top two barriers, so we will get to those. So let me start first then with boundaries and breaks. And I want to emphasize here that we recognize that self-compassion can feel a little squishy to some people and maybe inaccessible for that reason. But I would argue that it's really not a soft skill. If you are trying to embrace professional sustainability and doing that through the lens of being kind to myself, not in a radical way, but in the same way that I would be kind to someone else, that actually requires practical actions and concrete steps, right? Beyond just occasionally offering a kind word to yourself. And so we could take this in a lot of different directions, but for simplicity, we're focusing on two key sort of umbrellas, I guess, of how you can practice self-compassion in ways that might feel a little more accessible to you. So we've categorized these by boundaries and breaks. And as I'm going through these, I invite you to really think about your own specific circumstances, right? Who you are as a human, but also what your life outside of work looks like, how you typically show up for work, and what those sort of unique constraints you have are. And try to choose just maybe one boundary and one break or recovery technique that you might consider implementing. So a few examples of how you might set a boundary can involve sort of a delineation between personal and professional time. So many of us over the last several years have had sort of the luxury of being able to work from home, at least part-time. But the drawback of that is that our professional time is more likely to bleed into our personal time. And so one way to try to push against that is to be super intentional about defining your work space and your work time and having that be separate from your personal time. So that might look like I only do work in my dedicated office or in this dedicated desk in my bedroom, and I don't do anything else there, right? I'm protecting that as this unique space for work and work alone. And I don't do work in my bed, and I don't do work in the living room. Another way to do that is to have really firm limits about when you're essentially on the clock and when you're off the clock. And we recognize that practical implementation might require a little flexibility during, say, AEP. Even so, I would also argue that it's more important than ever to implement some boundaries, even if they look a little more liberal at that point. So this could be, no emails after 5 p.m. or 8 p.m. or whatever feels reasonable for you, or I'm not going to be answering phones on the weekends, right? So think about what that might look like for you. If you're already good about that or that seems impractical, then think about whether you can sort of block out bigger chunks of time in your work day or your work week for what's often called that sort of deep focus work. If you remember several slides back when we kind of bucketed the different pressures or burnout drivers in your industry, I'm thinking about the operational friction here. And I would imagine, I don't have to go through these myself, but that it's kind of tedious and requires some focus to go through sort of like new policies and procedures and regulation. And if you're getting interrupted by pings or phone calls every 2 minutes or every 30 seconds, like that really detracts from your ability to focus on and just get through that deep work. And so it actually saves you time in the long run, makes it easier to clock out a certain time if you can find a way to sort of protect a bigger chunk of time here or there for that deep focus work. And then finally, saying no to non-essential tasks is another thing that we would advocate for. I think this tends to be even harder for women in general to not just say, oh, okay, I guess I'll fit it in. And so I would encourage you, instead of having your default as, yeah, okay, I'll fit it in, or sure, to make your default no. If it's a non-essential task, the answer is no. If that feels too harsh, then there's a middle ground, which is just pausing before you answer. Maybe implementing sort of a 24-hour rule, or I like to call this rule, never say yes, in parentheses, right away, right? Buy yourself some time to really ask yourself, do I have the capacity to do this? And what's the cost if I'm saying yes to this? Is it time with my family? Is it slipping quality of work in this other stuff that's important, my current clients, right? So really think about what you say yes to. And then finally, you need to consider who you need to communicate these expectations and boundaries and how you're going to do that. Okay, so you don't need to grab a bullhorn or pay for an ad on social media so that the whole world knows what your boundary is. But there might be some clients or colleagues or supervisors who are accustomed to hearing from you sort of right away or in the overnight hours. And so if you're making a really intentional shift, think about whether there are a few folks who you might want to communicate this to, right? You can let them know, hey, I'm trying something a little different this AEP or for the next month in order to ensure I'm able to do my best quality of work, right? You might be hearing from me a little later than you're used to. I promise I'm on it, and a reasonable expectation would be reach out again if you haven't heard from me in 24 hours, right? So you can riff on that. That's just an example of what it could sound like. Sometimes I will see people write this in their signature line in an email. Like, these are my sort of working hours. You can expect to hear from me within, right, one business day, something like that. All right, and then moving on to breaks. Yes, PTO is wonderful. Yes, take a trip to Tahiti or the cabin. That's really great for resting and recharging your batteries. But we're actually talking more at a smaller scale here. Ultimately, taking a vacation and taking your PTO can help in the short term, but it's not as impactful over the long term as these sort of micro recovery techniques that you can build in throughout the day or throughout the week. So again, lots of different directions that you could take this in. I'm just going to give a few suggestions here. So one might be coming up with some sort of mental reset between meetings or between tasks, right? If you're shifting from some of the administrative stuff to some sales stuff to emails, right? Allow yourself to mentally disengage from one and then turn your focus to another. And I'm going to give sort of a sports analogy to explain why I think this is important from a psychological and performance perspective. There were some comments about football earlier. This is not for the Packers fans, Skol. But, sometimes a quarterback throws a pick six, right? Not great, really frustrating. And yet you don't want the quarterback to just be replaying that over and over in his mind, right? You really need them to just set it aside and move forward, right? Focus on what's it? No, geez, I can read that. You want to just have your quarterback refocus on what's in front of them right now, because their performance, right? We know this, right? Sports psychologists know this, that their performance is going to be hindered, generally speaking, if they can't move on psychologically from what happened to what they need to do right now. Same thing applies to all sorts of other contexts, including the workplace, right? So how can you unplug, let go of the stress from that phone call or that meeting, and just take a deep breath, maybe? Mindful breathing's on this list. I'm switching tasks, right? And that might be all it is, deep breath. And now I'm answering emails, right? It's just a cue to your mind and body that this is what I'm doing now, moving from A to B. We also really like physical movement as a good way to sort of just micro recharge the batteries. You're not gonna go all the way from empty to fully charged, but to help you kind of move on and re-engage your focus. So this can be as simple as, a few stretches, standing up, going to the bathroom and walking back. A lot of us wear watches that prompt us every hour, right? Just stand up and move your body for a minute, right? That's all it has to be. It doesn't have to be bigger than that. Although by all means, if you want to buy a treadmill, walking pad for under your desk, that's an even better way to do it. So feel free to go as big or as small with this as you want. All right, so this is the part where we're coming back to some of those comments you had about what makes self-compassion feel really hard or inaccessible. And I mentioned that some of those comments you shared really map onto what we've heard from other folks in your field too, right? I just don't have enough time. Right? Frankly, this isn't just unique to your field. I think we feel this way too, as parents and mental health professionals. So there's not enough time for me to do this, or I can't, right? I gotta do all these other things, and it can even border on martyrdom at times, which is really just not effective at the end of the day. And so, I think that some of the best ways to try to overcome those obstacles are to reframe self-compassion or professional well-being, not as a luxury, not as some sort of squishy, hippy-dippy granola thing, but really as a professional imperative or even professional responsibility, ethical responsibility. Right? That idea of you can't pour from an empty cup is just so true universally. And so if that's your backdoor approach to remind yourself that I can do better, work for my clients and then be able to feed my family, then that's the backdoor approach you can take, right? This is a professional responsibility. I can do better work for longer if I take care of myself here and there too. Right? And then the other bit of this, I think will feel like a hammer coming at you from us at this point, is that idea of just starting small, right? Those micro recovery techniques, those one small thing. Even a little bit can help. And what we know as psychologists, the science is really clear on this, that any kind of human change, behavior change, is much more likely to be sustainable if you start small and consistent, right? So take away one small thing from today, make a commitment, stick with it for about 3 weeks, right? Ideally daily for 3 weeks, and then check in, see how it's going. Adjust if you need to, and then build from there, right? If you do that in 3-week spurts, in a few months from now, you'll actually be doing quite a few things differently that can really make a big impact on your well-being.
Okay, so we focus mainly on, as Heidi said, sort of those micro level, small actions that we can take. And those are certainly powerful. But really, when we're thinking about true well-being and true professional sustainability, we really want it to be more than just about sort of the day-to-day stress. And this is really about building a foundation that helps us thrive over time. So think of it like building a structure, right? A single brick is just like a well-communicated boundary or one of those micro breaks. But really, when we think about having a truly resilient structure, one that really can withstand a lot of uncertainty and strong winds and the stress of the enrollment period, we really need 3 strong pillars to serve as our foundation. And so these are the pillars that we'll talk about to wrap up our time with you today. The first one is purpose. This is how to connect really to our why. Why do we do this work? What are the values behind that? The second is adaptability. Change is inevitable, and that's part of why we're talking about navigating uncertainty, is that there's uncertainty everywhere you look nowadays, right? Not just in your field, but sort of at larger levels as well. And so how do we really embrace change as a way to be adaptive to build our resilience? And then finally, our connection. We're not in this alone. Relationships are important in terms of our personal and certainly your professional work as well. So we're going to talk about how to combine these all together to serve as a long-term resilience strategy after we do a little poll.
All right. Well, for any of you paying attention, this is going to be your final poll question for the day. And I'm happy that it is not involving sports because it's getting a little wild in the chat. Which boundary do you promise to set but don't? Ooh, we're calling people out here in the final poll. All right. Do you A, stop work at a reasonable hour? B, no after-hour texts? C, take lunch like a human? Or D, buffer time between meetings? Oh, I am so glad that schedule send on email is not on there, although I guess that would be stopping work in a reasonable hour because schedule send is my best friend. All right, so we have, it looks like we've got a close race between our agents do not like to stop work at a reasonable hour, and they do not like to take lunch like a human.
Okay.
But it looks like they're slightly better with buffering time. That buffering time between meetings is one that I really would like to work on. That's like the best form of self-love.
Sure. Not rushing right in. Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. It looks like taking lunch like a human is going to win that top prize, as people are probably eating their lunch while,
Sure.
while answering this.
Yes.
All right. We're going to end the poll, and I can't wait for the conclusion.
Okay. So a little bit more in depth on these pillars of long-term resilience. The first one is this purpose idea. This is connecting to the why of why you're doing this work, what's important to you, what kind of professional do you want to be. And this is an interesting question to ask yourself. It's sort of, what is one small part of my work today that made a positive impact on somebody, even if it was just for a moment? Many of you go into this high-stress, values-driven field because of the relationship component, right? Because you want to serve other people, you want to help them navigate life and life's uncertainties and life planning. And so remembering that this isn't just a grind, that I'm not here to just be an email sender or a bad news deliverer, really requires intentional thinking about what is something, an interaction I had, something very small, that reconnected me to the purpose of why I do this work. An idea for putting this into a practical Practical way is maybe a brag board, right? You can do this as a workplace, you can do this as an individual. Here in Minnesota, we don't really like to say brag, so if you want to use a different word, keep it humble, right? But also positive. An actual or a digital folder, saving positive feedback, thank you notes, screenshots, just reminding you that the work you do does make a difference, right? So think to yourself, maybe jot down a note, how will you practice purpose this week, connecting to your why? Second pillar, we have adaptability. As we mentioned, the title of this presentation is Navigating Uncertainty. And uncertainty can come at us from all different levels, from our smallest inside our home, our personal lives, and those of our family, to our workplace and changing dynamics in your industry, to our community. And so really embracing change as something that you will encounter at any of these levels and sometimes all at once is a really good open mindset to practice. This is the ability to have flexibility in the face of changes, right? Being able to pivot and check in with yourself to reorient to new information. So try to embrace it. Just even saying to yourself, I'm going to embrace change is sort of a mindset shift in and of itself. And when we experience rejection or something didn't go as well as we wanted to, instead of interpreting that as failure, thinking of it as data collection. This is information for me. Why, not poor me, why did this happen? It was because of me and who I am and I didn't do enough. Maybe, what is this situation trying to teach me? What can I learn here? What's information that I have now that I didn't? And so how will you apply adaptability this week? And then finally, our third pillar for long-term resilience is about connection. This is maybe the most important. Nobody is here on this planet alone, and we exist in relationship to each other, right? And so thinking about this applied to your work and how connection can really serve and feed you and feed that resilience, maybe it's going beyond just sort of the transactional emails about who needs to do what, and really pausing to check in with those around you. How are you today? What's going on with you? Can I share something that's going on with me? Some of us might need calendar reminders for this, automated reminders, that's okay. Lean on that technology to make it part of your daily routine or your weekly routine. Thinking about how to organize a gathering where maybe part of our meeting or part of our lunch is not just about talking shop, but it's actually getting to know each other and building sort of a deeper connection there. Leaning on your interests. You are not one-dimensional. Work is not the only thing you do, and that makes us well-rounded and able to identify and connect with people, all sorts of types of people, right? So I want you to think about, are there ways that I've been neglecting really investing in that connection, and how can I foster connection this week?
All right, so we're going to come back to Mary to just end her story on a happier note, right? So Mary was really struggling in the most recent annual enrollment period. You might recall she was really burning the candle at both ends and noticed some lingering challenges, and she just wasn't able to bounce back. But Mary decided to sort of take initiative and figure out how she could reconnect with her passion and put some specific kind of boundaries in place to help her along the way. Sorry, I think the slides are a little funky right now. So as I recall, there we go. Mary practiced self-compassion, and she did it in a really practical way. She had a mentee and thought about some of the counsel she had given a mentee recently, which was essentially just don't let this job be your life, right? Be present with your family. And she realized it was a little hypocritical for her to not be taking her own advice. So she tried applying that counsel to herself. Second, she set just one boundary, right? She decided to not check emails after 6 p.m. And that was a pretty big shift for her. Third, she connected with her purpose, and she did this by maybe riffing on the sort of brag board, just asking herself at the end of each work shift, what was one thing that went well today? What was one small win? And this is a big mindset shift for somebody who maybe tends towards rumination about what didn't go well, right? Ugh, that was an awkward interaction, or that did not go well. So instead of sort of ruminating on her failures, she reminded herself of sort of one thing that went well today, And that's a much nicer way to sort of close the chapter for the day. She embraced a new change in the workplace, which took a little upfront effort, right? So a new kind of software management system takes some effort to get up to speed, but ultimately saved her a lot of time and headache down the road. And then finally, she decided to start a monthly gathering with a few colleagues she liked, but had sort of lost connection with as she'd been eating her lunch coffee at her desk for months. All right, so just once a month, not a huge commitment. We're going to go out to lunch and just connect it human to human, not talking about work. All right, so just making a few simple shifts here and there made a big difference for Mary. So kind of bringing everything all together here, self-compassion really is the foundation for professional well-being. Breaks and boundaries are sort of essential tools that allow you to practice self-compassion in your daily life. Purpose, adaptability, and connection are those three key pillars for a long career, a sustainable career that gives you some meaning and also lets you have pretty decent work-life balance. And we hope that you will sort of think about one or two small takeaways from this. Maybe share commitments to each other, maybe share them in the chat or with a partner in your practice or at home. When you say it out loud or when you articulate in front of other people, we know it increases your accountability. And one sort of final tip we have builds on something Jackie said a bit ago, but that idea of having sort of recurring reminders in your calendar. Do this for your professional well-being plan too. Maybe a monthly cadence, right? The first Monday or Friday or Sunday of the month, I'm just going to check in. How am I doing with my one commitment? Do I need to make some adjustments? Is it going well? Can I add one more thing for the next month, right? So this doesn't all just fade away after today, right? You want to get into the routine practice of kind of auditing yourself for professional burnout and small shifts that you can make to keep a more sustainable, enjoyable career. All right, so I think we've got just a few minutes here. If anybody has questions or comments, we're happy to field those.
We had so many comments in here. Someone said, this has been by far the best CE I have ever been on. People are wanting you to do sessions daily, if we can get you to do that. But I feel, I love the participation. Someone else just said, extremely awesome presentation. So not any questions, I think just truly an appreciation for the information you provided. I think also some people are feeling very seen, and so I think it really hit home with so many. But we also realize you all have been on these CE sessions for a very long time this morning, so I am going to turn this over to our CEO, Emily Responte, who is going to close us out for today. Emily,
Great.
over to you.
Thank you. I really wanted to thank Heidi and Jackie for taking the time, and actually we love them so much we are having them come with our own staff next month. So again, we wanted to thank Doctors Jackie and Heidi, but also Bill and Galen for joining us today, and thank you to all of you. I know we've been doing this for a few years and really appreciate twice a year how you come and spend a couple of hours with us for some CE. But again, if you're local, make sure you come check out our life cycle of an agency. If you're a woman, we hope you join us for our annual Above the Glass. This year it's in Woodbury on March 6th, and we have Sharon McMahon, who is a governor. To check her out on Sharon Says So. So we really hope you continue to join us for all of the content we have, continuing to learn and join us. And hopefully at these events you get to spend some time connecting on more than just work. So again, if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to your SRM or check us out at leclercgroup.com.